I got
Yes.
to watch that movie again solely for the nostalgia of it.
There are
It's so
so
good.
many like see the thing what's one of the crazy things is getting to like the internet age where you grow up with the internet and it's not till you have been in the internet ecosystem for like a decade that you start to look back on your childhood and you're like oh, even before we used the internet, that was a meme. Like
Right, right,
that was like a meme for us as kids. There's
right.
so many quotable lines from that movie that are like that have meme virology
Cemented.
to them. Yes, there's the looks like there'll be a double swinging tonight.
Yes.
um,
Oh my
what
gosh, I remember that.
what let me think.
I don't know. It's one of those things that when we try, like right now, to force them to come up, it is a challenge. But when you're just going through day to day life and something just pops up out of nowhere and you just internally chuckle to yourself because like, haha, that's really funny.
And like you
And when
can't say
somebody
it.
goes to right, because if someone asks you about it, hey, what do you find so funny? I'm just like, don't worry about it.
So you're like,
Just like
okay, listen, it takes like 7 years of internet history and a PhD course in memology for me to explain this to you.
right,
So,
and then even if I explained all of that, you still wouldn't get the laughing part of it. Just okay, for example, all I have to say is dun dun
yeah,
Darla because there's probably a massive portion of the internet and most of the normal world that would never even find that scene funny. The only reason we find it funny was because we particularly rewound that scene, causing the repeated
and and
dun,
right,
dun,
it's also one of those kind of
the
things where like
environment.
it was a mistake that caused it to be funny. It was
Right,
because leaning on the remote, hitting that rewind button, but only for a fraction of a second, that caused it to
right.
jump back 5 seconds or like 2 seconds or whatever it was when you quickly press that rewind button and let go, was exactly enough time to rewind that scene to that point. And we were like, do that again, and we just
Do
kept
it
doing
again,
that
do it again.
again. Yeah.
But the thing is that like Mama come in and be like, "What are you doing?" Because we play it over and over like 80 times, and so even if you tried to explain that to someone else, they wouldn't like get the humor. They'd just be like, "Haha, okay, I guess you found that funny. Okay, that's fine." And you're
Exactly.
like, Just don't worry about it." Good stuff. Good stuff. Go ahead and talk about what your goal was, what drove you to do this, what initiated you trying to run this, and then why you got me involved, and we'll roll with that.
Yes. Okay. So there is a meme in the community, right? And I'm only going to tell you a portion of this meme because I like personally I find the meme to not be 100% wholesome. Like it's kind of toxic. But the wholesome portion of the meme is you play the game long enough to become a walking advertisement for the game. You like what compels people to walk around the neighborhood and knock on someone's door and say, hey, do you have a moment to talk about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, right? Like there's something about the experience that they have had with that subject that makes them feel like this has been such a positive experience for me. I have to share this with other people, right? Like I can't now, in retrospect, imagine what I can't remember what my life was like before I had this experience. And so then you think of that projected onto other people, and you're like, they must know, they must know. And so it becomes everybody's dream after they've experienced a story like Final Fantasy XIV. It becomes their dream to like have other people experience that. It is something that leads people to want to share in other people's experiences when other people have that experience for the first time. It's both cathartic and it's exploratory, right? Because you get to explore other people's perspective on events, but it's also cathartic because you get to relive your experience with it as well. And that's what makes
Right.
it such a great opportunity for recording and creating and experiencing something. Because what I found is I wasn't interested in watching other people play the game until I already had so many amazing moments and experiences in the game that I'm now like, I want to see what other people thought and felt when they had those experiences. And so
Right.
my hope is that you'll in the process have same kind of revelation, right? I'll have a whole like a docket of like content that you should like. Okay, these are the people you can go watch now that you've progressed through this portion of the game. Um, but that's really where the impulse comes from, right? Is that I got to certain points in the story And I was just so impressed and so happy and so pleased with my experience with that story. The first thing you think of is like, who else would appreciate something like this, right? Who do I know who could just totally get into this? And you know how like we used to talk about Star Wars back when that was like kind of like the only thing we thought about every day? It was just Star Wars every day, nothing but Star Wars.
Right. 80% of it in solely sound effects.
Correct,
But
correct.
yes.
That's really what I felt like the story and the game had that potential for, that kind of just like all encompassing, like I can't stop thinking about this, you know?
It's got a lot of depth to it and stuff that causes you to replay it over and over in your head as
Yes.
you chew on it.
I want to hear from your side, from your perspective. How annoying was it when I first messaged you about it? I think probably back in like June or July, right? And then progressively over time, how did you feel when you were getting messages about Final Fantasy XIV?
Anyone who's similar to me can get super obsessed about a certain thing for a period of time, and that will be my entire life. Everything that I think about, everything that I do, everything that I want to do is surrounding that particular topic. Either it will fade away, or all these other sorts of things just kind of eventually kind of get in the way of it. And so as the time went on in which you were saying, "Oh, the story is amazing. The story is amazing. This is amazing. These experiences are amazing." I'm like, I'm sure that they are, but there are many things in my life that I will probably never experience,
Mm-hmm.
and this may be just one of those things that I just kind of have to shrug and go, I'll just never get around to it." There's books that I will never read, there's movies that I will never watch, there's a bunch of things that I want to experience that I probably never will, just because life is limited in time and you can't experience everything. And so I chalk this up to being one of those. And then when you approached me about this, and it kind of coincided well with a point in my life when other areas like the esports stuff were calming down, and I actually did find myself with a little bit of time that I could dedicate to it, and that it wasn't a get on and play 40 hours a week. You need to join in and
Right.
jump into raids and everything, which is the thing with League of Legends that I got to with a bunch of my friends and even family members that play League. That it's like you have to dedicate like 5 hours on a Saturday afternoon slash evening to grind out a bunch of games with them to then play Clash for another 3 hours. And I'm just like, I can't grind that much. And so when you approached and you were like, it's just gonna be an hour or two once a week, and so it's small snippets of investment that build over time.
Mm-hmm.
That piqued my interest heavily.
Mm-hmm.
But part of the thing that stood out to me each time that you came back to it over and over again was the story. Was that the story was great. There was impactful moments in the story, and that the story grows, and that the characters develop and grow over time. And that said to me that there was more at work than your typical watch the number grow
Right,
type
which
MMO.
from my background with RuneScape is like, oh my god, they're gonna be selling me this game where it's just gonna be making numbers get bigger. It's not, like that's my thing. Like I'm addicted to see numbers get bigger.
Right. And that's not me. Yeah, so all that to be said, the fact that you were persistent, that it was about story and character development, and that it can be played single player as well. I
Mhm.
love community. I love people. I love experiencing things with other people.
There's kind of a, I mean, you're obviously somewhat familiar with the hot water that Blizzard's been in for a while this year with lawsuits and other just sort of general player disappointment and decreasing engagement they've had to deal with. Part of Final Fantasy's moment that it's had this summer and this fall is in part due to an exodus of players from that game in particular, from World of
Mm,
Warcraft over to Final Fantasy. It is precisely about that. It is a sort of dawning recognition that, like, as we get older, as we become more acutely aware of the importance of our time, the prospect of buying into these abusive systems that are developed to try and capitalize on your time, capitalize on sensations of FOMO, drive you back to the game, make you feel obligated to constantly log in every day. It's a growing communal awareness that this is very unhealthy, very unsustainable practices inside the gaming
Gaming
industry.
sphere.
Right, it's a structural problem with the environment. Blizzard is just one example of a very heavily optimized environment to make players experience that as much as possible.
I actually immediately step away from any game that tries to advertise dailies to me.
Yes.
That's a huge thing in gaming right now. There were games that I got caught up in that I have to log in every single day. And I did it for a month or two, and it was just exhausting trying to keep up with that. So,
Yeah.
is there no dailies in Final Fantasy? I'm surprised if there isn't.
Final Fantasy is qualified as like a theme park MMO, right? And it's that idea that you step into this environment and there are a huge number of things that you can go do. If you want to step into this environment and only ride this one roller coaster over and over, you're welcome to do that, right? That's totally fine. If you want to go into this environment and try everything once and then you're done, you don't ever want to try it again until they add new rides to the environment. That's something else, another thing you can do. If you don't know what to do and you're trying to judge, well, is this something that I want to spend my time on versus this something I want to spend my time on? That's one option where it's a low investment. So it's like, well, if you only do this thing once, we're going to give you a little extra reward for spending your time on that thing today. But if you don't spend your time on that thing today, then you don't have to.
Positive reinforcement rather than negative reinforcement.
Correct. Correct.
If you choose to invest in this thing, we'll give you a little bonus. But if you don't choose to invest in it, you're not going to be punished and lose something for not having invested in it.
Right.
Well, it still has daily, so that's it. I'm out.
That's it.
Cancel
I'm
it all.
out.
Turn the recording off. I'm done.
When people think of dailies in Final Fantasy, they think strictly of the duty finder system, and that's an environment where you can randomly queue into different types of group content. The incentive they give for queuing into any one of these activities once a day is a large chunk of experience. So, like, for example,
Oh, okay.
you come across a portion in the story, and you're maybe say you're playing old content because you're new to the game, you're just starting. Thankfully, there's a lot of new players to the game currently. But say that it was a lull period, player count's low, you're brand new, you're starting, there's not a lot of people doing older content. You get to a dungeon, you need to do this dungeon to move forward with the story. You queue into it, and you need 3 other people to join you to do that dungeon, and nobody else like woke up that day, got online, and was like, you know what, I feel like going and doing that dungeon. How would you ever get joined up with those people? That's what that system exists for. That system exists for once a day, somebody somewhere is going to log in and be like, you know what? I want a big fat chunk of experience to help level up this character or this job today. So I'm going to queue into this duty. I don't know what I'm going to get, and they get paired up with you, and they get to help you move through that dungeon to help advance your story. And their reward for being like, tell me what to do today, is a large chunk of experience that furthers their gameplay experience. So that's where it's supported, like you said, it's a rewarding system rather than a punishment system for failing to engage with it.
And it's a healthy version of the multiplayer experience. I was actually talking with some people within the Excellency community about this, in that we were talking about what would you want to see out of MMOs for Riot Games, League of Legends MMO? What would be good or bad about that? And it's frustrating when the multiplayer aspect feels like such a gimmick, in that you could play the entire game really never interacting with anyone. I was like, well, what's the point of throwing multiplayer in there? It's just like, oh, everyone happens to be playing single player, but just all together, whatever. But then there's the opposite of that, where you can't do massive portions of the game without there being other multiplayer members to join you, like raids and things. But it ends up almost becoming this bitter fight, because people don't really want to be playing out the same content that you're playing out, but they kind of have to, because you're trying to get through it, and they feel obligated to get you through whatever. So it
Right.
becomes this. I think one of the main ones that I remember from World of Warcraft specifically was some guy who was way higher level than most of the other people that were playing in it. Basically soloed the entire dungeon solely because he had a friend that he was trying to run through it as quick as possible. And so every single fight, every single room, every single boss or whatever that we went through, he just ran right in, just murdering everything, killed it all. It was like, all right, move on, and just ran to the next room and kept going. And it kind of stole that experience for trying to work your way through a dungeon step by step. Who's the next guy to go? Oh, we went down this wrong turn. We got to fire our way back to get back
Don't
to the other
aggro too
room.
many mobs at once, you know.
Exactly. It took away that whole experience because he just soloed everything himself, and he was only doing it just to get his friend through it, so that the friend could move on with other stuff. And that felt really bad too. And so I think that that kind of a system that sounds like Final Fantasy XIV has is really healthy, and it merges that you need other people, so it is multiplayer, but they are rewarded for supporting newer players and bringing people up. It's a collective bringing people
Hmm.
up, in which everyone feels rewarded by the end of it, without that forcing some people that are higher up to get down here. You got to be on this bottom level to get your friend through, kind of a thing.
And I
That's
think,
really cool.
yeah, that's totally true, because those people that are queuing into their roulette for the day, um, they are queuing into this because they want the reward of the experience chunk for doing that, right?
Mhm. Right.
I want X, I do Y, and I get Z. The other players who have never done that dungeon before, they want to progress with the story. So they do the dungeon and they get to the end. Nobody feels like they are having to carry someone else, or that they are the reason that they, like, nobody feels like they're dragging anybody else down, right? Because both players are
Right.
coming to it, that activity, for a specific goal, and they're both getting rewarded independently for the goals that they want.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Gamer Podcast. Two gamers sit down and discuss mechanics of all sorts of games.
Yeah. What kind of games do you find enjoyable? Um, the things that you either currently play or that you would play if you had the time?
I shifted from games that were, a couple of years ago, very focused on multiplayer collaborative team play. So things like, well, that's not good. Unable to download patch files. Hopefully, it'll work its way through the launch error. Please don't cancel the whole thing. Oh,
I don't know. Just start the launcher again. It'll pick up where it
magic
left off.
magic of video editing. We're gonna roll right past it. Let me try to launch it again.
So when you put in passwords, do you actually, like, in your head, tell yourself password, so that if there's any mind readers around, they don't read your password in your mind as you type it out?
No, I definitely don't. Oh, is it really gonna start from ground zero all over again? We'll cross our fingers and see. I went from playing a lot of like League of Legends, very team-based oriented. I like the community. I like being able to hang out with friends and play a bunch of games. But very quickly, as my life got busier and I became more of a responsible adult, we'll put quotations around the word responsible. Being time locked into a set period of time that I had to play for this period, the classic "Mom, I can't pause the game" scenario, became a bit of an inconvenience. I've long wanted start just a single player long play solo vanilla Minecraft experience, a game that I would also invest a massive amount of time into, but except that they are still doing big updates to it, called Satisfactory.
Hmm.
That is a factory building efficiency game where you're taking resources, turning them into items, turning them into new items, adding other resources, making bigger items and stuff. And oh my gosh, when that game first came out and was in beta, I grinded that game for a very long time. The other game that I'm looking at that I probably will never get around to, but I would love to play, that if I was a full time content creator, that would be my bread and butter, is a game that isn't even released yet that's called Hightail. I don't know if you've heard of it or not.
No, I have not.
Um, it's like a Minecraft 2.0 developed by Minecraft modders who took the core concepts of Minecraft and then just ran an entirely new direction with it. It's very story based. You and a tight crew that create this adventure, but it builds a lot of off of the Minecraft blocks, and it expands very heavily. As soon as Hytale advertised that we have wall half slabs, I was like, oh, "That's it! You got my game. You got my money. I'll throw it at you. I don't care."
What are some of your story-driven experiences? And this could be books, this could be movies, shows, but especially when it comes to things like games, what kind of defines the aspects that you like about stories? That, whether that's from the genre, right? What type of genre of stories do you enjoy, or what are the things that you come away from these stories and these experiences that make you feel like that was a good one as opposed to other ones? Hopefully that was
Hmm.
encapsulated enough.
My most enjoyable experiences toe a very, very fine line between the negative experience of no-win situations and the positive experience of practically no-win situations in which a character has to make an incredibly hard choice, and yet still by choosing the right thing, like to do the right thing, to be the spokesperson for justice, whatever it is, to do the right thing that leads to a net positive outcome. Now, I'm careful about saying that because it's not that it has to end with a happy story, everyone lives happily ever after, but that it ends with a overall world is a better place, net positive outcome. I respond best to those stories. I don't like when characters have a just pure and straightforward lose-lose situation. That no matter what they do, they're gonna die. No matter what they do, their loved one's gonna die. Whether they pick choice A or choice B, they're presented with this false sense of choice when the reality is it doesn't matter what they do, it's still gonna end in tragedy or whatever. I dislike that.
Hmm.
However, when there are characters that seem like they're faced with a no-win situation and they make the hard choice to keep fighting regardless, that ends in a net positive overall, I definitely can strongly feel for them.
Even if it's kind of like a bittersweet victory type.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Is a bittersweet victory is still a victory, and I can absolutely get behind the bitterness of that victory because reality has way more bitterness in it than
Right.
most people like to think about. Everyone kind of internally, there's that hope, that personal hope, is that it'll be that Disney classic, everyone ends happy and it's a happily ever after. But the reality is that even in real life victories, there's usually some small or moderate sized bitterness that comes with it because hardships make life worth living. And the stories that I dislike are when it's all losses, regardless of what anyone does. There's
Right.
this sense that there could be a victory if maybe you. No, no. The reality is
Yeah, that's
you could have
the
stood there and done nothing, and it would still be the same loss. You could have put all the effort in. You could have made every right choice, and it's still a loss. I like high fantasy. I love dragons. I've been obsessed with dragons. Very early young adult fiction fantasy books. I attribute a little bit to like Mercedes Lackey,
mhm.
um, and just the art of dragons. Combine all of that together gave me a strong um, draw towards anything that had dragons in it. And I've read some really crappy dragon fiction
Just because
stories.
it had dragons.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, it's got dragons in it. I gotta get it. I'm gonna read it. And then I got about halfway through it. I'm like, this is trash. This is actually awful. Anyone who loves dragons will know Dragon Riders of Fern. And they pioneered the whole humans could talk to dragons through mental telepathy. Medieval fantasy is by far when people ask like if you could live in a fantasy world, what would you live in? Medieval fantasy. Take away the diseases and take away the lack of cleanliness and that type of vibe is straight up my alley. Secondary to that would probably be cyberpunk. Well, actually, probably secondary steampunk, and then that kind of bleeds a little bit into cyberpunk. And from some of the pictures that you've sent for Final Fantasy, that it kind of has a little bit of sciencey fiction because you got flying vehicles and some of this stuff has echoes of spacey themes to it. It is mostly that hyper enhanced fantasy with a little medieval thrown into it. And that some of the outfits are kind of what I'm curious about because there's
Okay.
like
Right.
jeans and a t-shirt, but then there's also this super fantastical armor and stuff that goes on with that. And I don't know that I've seen anything steampunkish except for like some of the vests. I was like, now that's kind of a steampunk vest. All right, that's pretty cool. But I will probably lean towards the more, if you will, Aragorn and Lord of the Rings motifs. The D&D vibe is probably what I'm going to lean heavily towards.
Okay. There's actually two things that brings up. One is about going back to about dragons, for example. The good news is that Final Fantasy has dragons. The crowd goes wild. Um,
Well, I know they have been dragon characters. The Aura, I think is how you say Aura. How do you
yes,
say
the
that?
the aura. Yeah.
You're gonna have to like walk me through how to say all those
Okay.
names
Yeah.
and everything if things get weird.
And that's actually that. If you ever want a pronunciation for something, I will give you my best to pronounce that. Occasionally, that answer will be my best attempt at whatever the actual answer is, and the answer of how I say it, right?
Okay, kind of
So
a blend of the
there is no
amalgamation.
obligation to get the names of anything right, right? Like, because
Cool.
like
I'm gonna roll every R.
well, if you call it aura, era, like whatever is just in your mind when you say it, when you read it on, in text on screen. I think I used to sweat when I was reading through MSQ, because you do a lot of reading in MSQ. I used to sweat trying to like pronounce names correctly. Nowadays, if I sweat pronouncing a name correctly, that's just because it's a personal challenge to try and pronounce whatever this weird looking name is. But it's a fantasy game. Like every single name, every place, every race, every person, like they have just this like weird conglomeration of letters and stuff. And it's like a string of like 4 consonants, right? And you're like, okay, Slufferburger,
Sounds good enough.
right. So you just kind of like eventually, like there's no obligation to get it right. You just kind of look at it, you're like, okay, it sounds like that.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah, I kept looking at it. I was like, it's aura, but you kind of put a little hiccup in the middle, so it's kind of like
yes.
aura. That's really cool. And a quick note on the fantasy names in general. I have a world that I'm building for my own fantasy books that I'll never write. And I started to invent a language for it. And literally, when you're inventing languages and names, the very beginning, like when you listen to people talk about how they invent languages, they more often than not just start with, I just put a bunch of letters down and it sounded cool, and I just start working from there.
There you go.
It's just throw some stuff in and see what happens.
It's very obvious
So
at times that was the design direction. They were like, I don't know what to name this person, and they just put a bunch of letters there.
right, exactly. How many people are going to read this? How many people are going to memorize this character's name? Don't worry about it. And then you get Star Wars fanatics who memorize every single Jedi's name and know that one even PL guy that everyone's like, who's that other Yoda character?
You have some experience with previous Final Fantasy games, right?
Right.
So,
Some limited.
like, what are those examples of Final Fantasy you've touched on before?
I think I played a portion of Final Fantasy X, and then I played through maybe about a third of Final Fantasy X-2 before complicated reasons I ended up not being able to finish that. I watched the Final Fantasy VII Advent Children movie a bunch of times, and that had me doing research into a lot of the just generic fantasy lore about what the orbs were and who the different like guilds and factories and groups of people were and kind of what was happening, because if you just watch Final Fantasy VII the movie from a very generic and quick touch aspect, you're like, wow, some of the fight scenes are really cool and some of the powers people have are awesome, and I have no idea what anyone stands for, why they're fighting, what on earth is happening, right? There's
Right.
something about Mother Gaia and energy and plants and something or other. For the most part, I would say that my play experience would be 10 and 10-2, and then my knowledge is mostly surrounding Final Fantasy VII. I know there's chocobos
Oh,
in it.
there you
Hey,
go.
there you go.
Everybody knows those
Chocobos
chocobos.
and Blitzball, which was episodes 10. Final Fantasy X was Blitzball. It was all about Blitzball. I hated playing Blitzball. But
So you've seen in different games, or like Advent Children, for example, that covers the world that Final Fantasy VII takes place in. You've seen different kinds of um, environmental and technological aesthetics take place,
yes,
right? So you've
yes,
you've seen like Seven. It straddles the line between what is petrol punk and what is nuclear punk.
those are good names for it.
Oh, okay, yeah. Thank you. I
Did
too,
you
I
invent
too
those?
have read TV tropes. You will see environments that feel very medieval fantasy, environments that feel very technology driven, environments that feel almost futuristic at times. Um, and they do, I will say, that can seem jarring from a concept like, okay, here's a game that incorporates all of these different, like vastly different aesthetics, but it is there is a art style to Final Fantasy, right? And that art style lends itself to being able to dip its toes into all these different types
Yeah.
of technological or cultural aesthetics, and they do a great job with weaving all of that together. Once you're in the game, once you're playing, and you get over the initial impact of like you're riding your chocobo and there's somebody driving a car next to you, and you're like, what? Once you get over that, you'll understand kind of how it feels. It is a melting pot of all Final Fantasy aesthetics together.
I would say that my experience with League of Legends probably helps a little bit because even though true lore for Runeterra has a little bit where you have the hex tech super technology of Piltover and even the chem tech of Zon paired with the almost Viking and no technology whatsoever Nordic Freljord. Runeterra has that, but you also get in game with skins literally pirates standing next to giant mech robotics, like literally what's it like Gundams? Yeah, like you
Right,
have
right.
Gundams fighting next to um
You
uh,
get that Dragon Con aesthetic,
vampires.
right?
Yeah, everything just kind of blends together into utter chaos.
Just covering earlier when you talked about stories where characters are forced to make hard decisions, but because the story has set them up to understand their personality, when they make a decision, it doesn't feel like they're being shoehorned into that by the story. It feels like it's a logical play out of the way that
Yes.
character would behave. Um, this Final Fantasy story is so excellent because it incorporates that, because it spends a lot of time to build up the personalities and the I say characters not from like the individuals, but their character. How comfortable are you with the idea of being forced to cry on camera?
Forced to cry?
By
I
the
don't know about
story,
that.
by the story, right?
Right, by the story.
You're like, I can't
Um,
believe that I got myself this invested, right?
Um, there's a lot of movies that I tear super heavily up in. It's been a while since I've actually had like tears running down my face type crying, but that I get extremely choked up in over a lot of movies that I probably and most people would look at as that, but you cried about that movie.
Right.
But it's because I got invested in the characters, I got invested in the story, and that if I feel for a character, I can't help but kind of choke up for it. I can tear up heavily or practically cry through a portion of a movie and then afterwards laugh about it with friends and being like, "Yeah, I know. Yeah, that got me, man. When that thing happened, it hit me right in the feels. Ah, I'm a crier, whatever. That's fine."
Right.
And I can still relate to how they feel about me without it forcing me to want to stifle my own emotional responses, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
That's good. That's
Again, it all depends on the story. I have no idea what the story is and how impactful that story is, but I will say that um, to relate it back to that character in Brandon Sanderson's story that was running towards the city, that was a moment that I'm just listening to it on an audiobook at work, and I am all but bawling as I'm working. Like I actually had to like take a moment and just be like,
right. Right.
and just be like, I am literally at my day job right now. No one else has any idea what I'm going through, and I am this close to just tears flowing freely down my face. And I had to kind of take that big pause for it. So you probably will get some of that reaction, but again, because this is a safer environment, I won't have that feeling of my boss coming up to me and be like, "Do you need to go home? Like, did someone die?" I won't have that going on, and so it'll be a safer, environment to be able to be more freely expressive. So
Okay, good, good. Yeah, no, I only asked because I just wanted to make sure that I just wanted to find out if there were any barriers there um, to being able to have that authentic experience that you want, right?
right,
Um,
I don't think so. We'll find out once we get rolling with the story. Is the story good enough to make Jake cry?
right.
We'll see. The challenge of the story. So
I will say that the Final Fantasy community economy runs on tiers, so it's it
cool.
is tier powered, and I think that's all the things that I'm going to cover now. I will save the reading section. I have it's maybe 5 minutes worth of reading or whatever. I'll save that for another time.
Wait,
But
wait. Bring the other screen back up real
shit,
quick.
shit.
It's perfect timing. We just finished downloading the whole
Did it
game.
finish?
It's
Did it
finished.
finish?
No, it didn't
Oh
finish.
shit!
In the background, I've been photoshopping the download thing to finish up. That's why you saw random windows pop up and stuff. I've been photoshopping the green bar, so it's actually like still like way at the beginning.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
So I thought that'd be pretty funny. I was sitting here watching. I was like, "There's no way this is even gonna get close to finishing in time." So yeah, I'm
No,
decent at Photoshop. Let me whip that up.
just leave it up overnight, and then we can play Q Simulator tomorrow.